Our first speaker is Sue Canterbury. Her topic is Charles Martin and the Matriarchs of Modernism in North Texas. Sue is the Pauline Gill Sullivan Curator of American Art at the Dallas Museum of Art. Before joining the DMA, Sue served as Associate Curator in the Department of Paintings and Modern Sculpture at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, which was preceded by her first curatorial position as Assistant Curator at the Clark Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Sue holds an MA and a BA in art history from Williams College and Wellesley College, respectively. Her DMA exhibitions include Alexander Hogue, the Erosion Series, Edward Strachan in Exaltation of Flowers in 2017, Cult of the Machine, Precisionism in American Art in 2018, Ida O'Keeffe, Escaping Georgia's Shadow in 2018. That was groundbreaking as far as I'm concerned. In Focus, Henry Asawa Tanner, 2021, Pursuit of Beauty, the May Family Collection of 2021, Point, Line, and Plane, the William B. Jordan and Robert D. Brownlee Bequest of Works on Paper in 2021, and she co-curated with Augustine Archega, Frida, Beyond the Myth. Will you welcome Sue Canterbury?
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. And this is really a bumper crop crowd here, so it's really great to see everyone here. Can we bring the lights down a little, please? Thanks. But to start off, Charles Martin and the North Texas Matriarchs of Modernism. Texas women were major practitioners and conduits of modernism in the state between the 1920s and the 60s. The majority were teachers, and acquisition of advanced training was vital for their professional advancement. In the 20s and early 1930s, graduate studies in art were not yet offered in the state. Columbia University's Teachers College in New York City was the key degree-granting institution for a master's in arts education, offering advanced training in fine, practical, and applied arts. So, off they went to New York City and encountered there a formative force in the person of Charles James Martin, who would profoundly shape their approach to composition and technique. British-born, Martin's family immigrated from England when he was a boy. He first studied with Arthur Wesley Dial at his summer school in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and subsequently at the Columbia's Teachers College, where he too became a teacher in 1914. Now, this happened to be the exact same year when a young artist by the name of Georgia O'Keeffe showed up. She had been sent to Columbia for further training as a prerequisite for her employment as an art instructor in Canyon, Texas. Martin's aesthetic acuity was such that, subsequent to her study with him, she continued to send her work to him for critique of her most recent work. And it is believed that his influence was key in moving her towards the modernism of the Stieglitz circle. That is to say, she learned to emphasize the essence of a subject rather than its form, and to interpret what she observed rather than faithfully representing it. Martin was adamant that modernist art be undergirded by solid, precise technique, and he demanded that his students learn the rules before even attempting to bend them. I propose to share with you the work of some of the Texas women that reveals the mark that Martin made on their artistic practice, a gift that they would subsequently introduce to their own students, like a gift of pedagogical DNA. In the interest of time, now I only have 40 minutes, I have chosen to limit my exploration to these 5 women, all from the Dallas-Denton area and connected to TWU, either as students or professors, and in the case of Corinne Spellman, both. They are Edith Mae Brezack, Marie Isel Delaney, Velma Davis Dozier, Thetis Lemon, and Corinne Mary Spellman. The best expression of Martin's pedagogical approach to composition is expressed through a 12-minute educational film he made in 1936, Creative Design in Painting, the exact title of one of his courses at Columbia's Teachers College. The film reveals his methodology for building the scaffolding of sound compositional design. In the film, he presented 4 examples of how to create compositions with balance and movement through the use of lines, straight and curved, set forth within this series of rectangles. In the first of these, at upper left, he strictly employed vertical and horizontal lines. The second, at upper right, is composed entirely of diagonals. And the third rectangle relied entirely on arcing lines, overlapping but carrying the movement around the page. And in the fourth rectangle, he combined all 3 types of line. His placement of lines and arcs, supposedly laid down through feeling, demonstrate how to achieve balance as well as emotive response. These types of line collaborated in pleasing movement around and through the composition. These are the tools that he would have provided any of these women, regardless of whether they studied with him as an undergraduate or a graduate student, or during one of Columbia's sponsored sketching classes he held nearly every summer for over 30 years. And that was in Provincetown. I think I skipped that part. So anyway. And here we have one of Charles Martin's watercolors, and it really effectively demonstrates all 3 types of lines in it. You have horizontals, of course, are going to lead you around this way, verticals up. You have the overlapping halves, the spheres, the circles coming around. But the whole point is to move you up, around, and back down. And it's almost like a framing device also, in a sense. It moves you around, but it's framing and leads you to the center. Nearly every summer for 30 years, Martin led Columbia-sponsored sketching trips near Provincetown and Cape Cod. All of the women addressed in this talk joined him there at least once, and some for several times. Students were expected to sketch plein air, creating preliminary drawings and/or watercolors that they would analyze and clarify back in the studio, stripping away extraneous detail to reveal the structural bones of the landscape, all the while employing the compositional methods. Although he was adept across several media, the majority of extant examples of Martin's work are in watercolor. My favorites by him are the landscapes he created in the summers around Provincetown. They're highly architectonic in style. His works are also expressive for the choice of color and its placement. This work in particular leans heavily on the use of diagonal lines to move our eye around the composition, and everything really plays a role in it. The lines of the sky, the diagonals carrying you over and down. He's using the roof line of the houses to bring you down, bring you back up. Everything just fits together, remarkably so. And the characteristics of his watercolors noted by critics were his use of white outline, which detaches masses of color from one another, or the manner in which he allowed the white ground of the paper chance to play an enlivening part in the general scheme. His work is also rich in its use of resonant blacks, all while managing to achieve architectonic pattern without any important loss of realism. But another critic observed, this is my favorite, the haphazard of nature, and he recreated it until, by virtue of art, it became a whole, an organism in which every part is essential to the others. An aspect worth pointing out also is the use of the bird's eye perspective, which appears in the works of several of our Texas women. And here's just another photograph of Charles Martin in Provincetown in front of several of his watercolors on display. And so now to the women. And first in the group, we have Edith May Brezac. Now, don't get overwhelmed by all that information on the screen, but I wanted to emphasize that these women were incredibly well trained. Aside from undergraduate and graduate work, in the 20s and the 30s, they went on to study at other places, and Edith May Brezac was no exception here. So they were very well versed, and I would say much better trained than any of the Dallas Nine ever were. And it's true. It's absolutely true. wait till you get to Spellman, you almost have to have a second page, So Edith Brezock studied at Columbia Teachers College both as a graduate and undergraduate. So while there's no record of her attending Martin's sketching class in Provincetown, a 1935 solo show at the Joseph Sartor Gallery in Dallas included an oil titled Provincetown. Whether the work still exists is unknown. Examples of her landscape are pretty scarce, many unlocated now, but what remains leaves you wanting more. Around 1937-39, it appears that her summer locale of preference was in the province of Quebec, around the Gaspé Peninsula. The work at left was exhibited in the Golden Jubilee exhibition at the State Fair of Texas of 1938. And on the right, Cloudy Day Gaspé took third prize at the first annual West Texas Art Exhibition sponsored by the Fort Worth Art Association in December of 1939. Note in the work on the right, the use of white and outlining the forms within the composition. And so you see the white coming around the edge of this mass of land. It's also outlining the edge of the roof here, even, the island in the background. And so like Martin was doing, she was using white outline. And she's also, of course, she's using basically like the rays of the sun on the left side for the updraft, the overlapping semicircles of the clouds, and these rays as the downdraft back down to the roof line, and you're brought back again in this circuit around the canvas, or around the paper. Another work that I really love, this house on the south shore of Gaspé. Note again the bird's eye view and how she is setting the house on a diagonal, which provides the movement down. Then up the left side of the canvas, the tree carries you up, the branches carry you over, and the other tree on the right side brings you back down and all around to the center subject of the house itself. And then finally, this wonderful print, this lithograph done in 1947, the long dock. And it's hard to tell where the dock actually ends almost, but again, here she is bringing you up the sort of vertical clapboarding, up the stovepipe there, chimney, brought up, the cloud is bringing back down to hitch a ride on the masts of the boat, which brings you to the long dock, which brings you back down and around. So she's working you, bringing you around the canvas, and she's also using white outline in areas of the work. So to basically separate these forms slightly from the background to give them more prominence. Another woman, Marie Isel Delaney. She was a Fort Worth she grew up in Fort Worth, essentially a native of Fort Worth. And she essentially saw Charles Martin as a master of composition, and she appears to have enjoyed working with him as she spent several summers studying with Martin, more than any of her colleagues. And if you see her resume here, very shortly laid out, she was coming from Fort Worth to Dallas to take lessons with a Mrs. Penrod when she's only 16 years old. And by 1925, she's graduating from CIA, or TW, whatever. But she graduated with a fine and applied arts major, and then she's in Provincetown by 1926 before she even gets her MA from Columbia in 27. And I believe she was in Mexico in 36 with Martin and back in Provincetown 37, though it's not documented, but I will explain why as we move along. And here we have a rather little-known still life by her in a private collection. And compositionally, this really operates along the same lines of Martin's compositional elements that he taught them, setting the still life on a diagonal, the edges of the cloth, and the flower container. They move the eye to the frame of the window. You go up, carried over, brought back by the flowers, and back down, and circling this, and then concentrating on the subject itself. White tulips was a mainstay in her exhibition record, first appearing at the Greater Dallas and Pan American Exposition of 1937, and several times more up into 1944. House's Provincetown, which might be considered her magnum opus, I would say, was exhibited at the New York World's Fair in 1939. The fair's government committee selected it for purchase, and the work was repatriated to Texas, sadly to MFA Houston. Oh well, but at least it's back in Texas. Anyway, it was one of 31 works so purchased and donated to museums and galleries across the country. The DMA, for instance, received William Lester's 3 crosses from that same World's Fair. Now, I believe it is that the inspiration for this work came from Delaney making another pilgrimage to Provincetown in the summer of 1937. A newspaper account announced that spring of 37 that Delaney had been selected as a Carnegie Fellow for the summer at Harvard University. In her interview, she commented that she also planned to study with Charles Martin in Provincetown if the schedule did not conflict with her scholarship at Harvard. Well, the Harvard scholarship ran from July into mid-August of a six-week course, so that really left her all of June to be in Provincetown. Regardless, the painting shows that she had absorbed the lessons of Martin, possibly even surpassing the master himself, with this wonderful massing of Cape Cod structures into a large pyramidal mass. The forms are clean, of extraneous detail, and she employs roof lines, ladders, docks, patterns to lead us around the composition. And just to drive the point home, the similarities between her work, House's Provincetown, and the watercolors that Charles Martin is standing by here in this. Same characteristics of the lighter edges of the roof that grow darker as they reach the pitch of the roof. And also she's using white in some areas to make forms stand out from the others. It's really quite a wonderful work, and I wish it were still in the Dallas, Denton area. But not so. So anyway, and here's another work, image from TWU, untitled, but by studying her exhibition record, this may be Cape Cod waterfront from about probably 1937 as well. And going forward, and I hope this image, yes, it's readable, yay. This work basically was in the Washington Critics Show in 1940, and this reproduction is from the Washington Post. They chose Marie Delaney's work to serve as sort of like the flagship image for that exhibition in Washington, but the work remains unlocated. Where is it? And then this painting, Mexican Landscape. It's very possibly created much earlier than the 1943 show that she had, a solo show she had at the DMA. The work by the same title was shown in the 5 States exhibition in Tulsa in 1940, and other Mexican themes were also shown as early in 1936. While I have not seen it documented, I would like to suggest that Delaney may have gone on a Colombian sketching trip with Martin in June of 1936, where the group, according to an article in the New York Times, worked in Cuernavaca, Pueblo, and Taxco. That same year at the Texas Centennial Exposition, Delaney's painting, Women of Taxco, made its debut. Critical commentary was very positive about Mexican landscape. Her stylizations are calculated, and when her Provincetown scenes or flower studies verge into abstraction, it is with her full knowledge. Among the most interesting pictures in the show are those of Mexican subject matter, including the endlessly fascinating composition, linear curving, angular, and cubistic of Mexican landscape. The caption between the image read, "The lady has a hand with angles and curves." Mexican landscape is one of the several pictures with Mexican subject matter in the solo exhibition by Marie Delaney. And then another work that's very little known, there's no title on it, but going by basically her exhibition record, she, in her solo show in 1933, she also showed a work called Early Evening in New Mexico, which I believe is this painting because you have that sense it's just about dusk as the sun is going down. And there's also documentation that she visited Albuquerque in 1939. And then moving to Theda Slimman, we all know her basically as a metal worker, known for her jewelry designs. These are two works by her that are in the collection of the Dallas Museum of Art. She was also a painter, watercolors, printmaker, but this was really her main thing, the jewelry. But she was also in Provincetown in 1933. And the proof that we have is essentially this work called Study for Houses. And though it's not mentioned in sources I've seen so far, this watercolor would seem to prove that she definitely was in Provincetown in 33. In July of 33, a work titled Houses was exhibited at the Provincetown Art Association. Whether it was this watercolor or an oil for which this work was preparatory is unknown. Note, though, how she employs a bird's eye view, setting forms on a diagonal, and further using white outline to separate some of the structures from the ground and from other areas in the background. And that brings us to Velma Davis Dozier, a Dallasite, who first went to SMU, got her BS in painting. But she took a metalworking course with Theda Slimman at Denton, and that probably veered her way. But still, she showed up at Columbia, determined basically to pursue a painting career. And she graduated in 33, and then 33, she was spent the summer in Provincetown. And this is a wonderful watercolor that I'm certain was created there. And trust me, it is a landscape. In it, she is employing the verticals, the horizontals, and diagonals to move us through the image. And these little rows here, I don't know what to call them. They're almost like little upside-down L wrenches or something lined up like little soldiers. But those same motifs appear in multiple watercolors by Corinne Spellman, while Corinne Spellman was also in Provincetown that summer of 1933. So seeing those, it's like, yes, that has to be, one of these landscapes on Provincetown, probably looking out to sea, and this most likely is one of those roads snaking its way through the landscape, which also appeared in a lot of Corinne Spellman's watercolors. And Velma would go on to still do painting, this wonderful, luscious little work. I wish there were more things like this by Velma Dozier, because this is really absolutely gorgeous. And painted 2 years after Provincetown. And here she employs a horizontal lines in the foreground, taking us over, and this wonderful grain shock is taking us up and hitching a ride then to this little mountain and carrying us over. We're coming back down and rushing back this way. And so she creates this wonderful movement, but the creamy, wonderful pigment that she's just smearing around on this canvas is just really just absolutely fabulous. I would love to have that. And the Lucky Now collection is the one that has it. And then this brings us to Corinne Spellman. There is her resume. And quite long and illustrious. Of course, at CIA, the College of Industrial Arts in Denton, and then off to Columbia. And then a Carnegie Summer Scholarship at Harvard right off the bat, out of Columbia, essentially in 27. And studied with the Art Students League and Mexico with Carlos Merida, and then to Provincetown in 33 with Charles Martin, and so on. She was quite accomplished. And in an essay about her thoughts about art that was published in 1967, Spellman recalled that being informed that she would be teaching a class on watercolor, she decided to head to Provincetown to gain more experience in the medium by studying with Charles Martin. She noted that his greatest contribution to her work was a feeling for linear composition. That sense for the linear, when combined with what she picked up from others, blended as a result. She felt she had emerged as a better teacher, and she hoped a better painter. And she added, "At times one can detect those influences, but usually I think my watercolors are primarily Spellman." Yeah. I had already learned from my research on Ida O'Keeffe, who also studied with Charles Martin, that his method of teaching at Provincetown was to have his students do plein air sketching in the environs of Provincetown. Once captured, they were expected to refine the scene by stripping away extraneous detail in order to get at the essence of the scene. While studying various images of Spellman's watercolor sketches, I suddenly connected the dots between these two sheets. It's the same location. The image at left being a more realistic rendition of the scene, a little bit more looser, wetter watercolor. And at the right, she stripped away the extraneous detail to capture the essence of the landforms themselves in a very architectonic manner. You can see the things lining up. This mass here becomes this mass here. Keeps some of the poles, and some of the little roof lines barely sketched in, but it is the same place. Good. We can see these. I had these done in a very high resolution scan from James Baker's book from 2004, which was not the best quality, so I wasn't sure if this was going to happen, but yay. Anyway, closely studying James Baker's publication of Spellman's work, her watercolors in particular, I was astounded to see multiple examples of how seriously she took Martin's assignment. She consistently pushed the envelope. This trio is one of my favorite series of sketches. They were preceded by a simple plein air sketch of a quarry. And she proceeded to create these three modified versions, each becoming increasingly spare, until in the last one she strips it down to the bones. Boom. But it's the exact same place. There's a house barely sketched in with a couple lines, the same little trees, and I love those little trees she uses. But she's just framing it. I'd say the middle one is my favorite out of the three. But she did these watercolors on July 19th and 20th in Provincetown in 1933. And all the while, you can see how she maintains a compositional structure of verticals, horizontals, and diagonals within the work. In 1967, Spellman also shared her thoughts about an artist's way of working. She said, "After long years of work, I am quite convinced that on-the-spot painting is bad for me. I see too much, and I become too absorbed in the details." She then proceeded to repeat essentially what she had learned from Martin. "I do an on-the-spot drawing, indicating the chief movements for elements which I want to emphasize, and later I look at the drawing, analyze, and reorganize it." And quickly, her painting of rooftops, Provincetown from 1933, which is in the city of Forney, and the little watercolor study for rooftops at right, where you can see how she's organizing. And of course, she's going to move on to bolder colors, etc. And note again that sort of aerial bird's eye view of the work. And then this other missing watercolor called The Lighthouse, probably from about 1936. In 1936, Spellman spent part of her summer in Maine studying watercolor with Elliot O'Hara at Goose Rocks Beach. Watercolors she exhibited in 1937 and 1939 revealed that she ranged north to the Two Lights Lighthouse on Cape Elizabeth, as well as ranging south to York, Maine, to capture the representation of Cape Nettic, or the Nubble White Lighthouse, which is located on a small offshore island. And that's the little archival photograph that I found online of the exact same structures here. And note again how she's still framing in the work according to what she had learned from Martin. It really definitely frames in the central subject. And also note particularly prominent here, the white outlining around these masses and even around all the structures here to make them again stand separate from the background. As Jack Davis has noted, it's difficult to see a clear progression of style as Spellman switched back and forth from one style to another through her career, and I agree that with his estimation that Spellman seemed to let subject matter more than anything dictate the style of her work. However, an element that threads throughout a great deal of her work was the scaffolding of great composition, a valuable tool she learned from Charles Martin. And on the left, you have the Forney gin, which is really a very sort of very subtle use of line, verticals, horizontals, and diagonals, and uses of shadow to again bring the eye around the composition. And Sunday on the Chicken Farm, somewhere between 1940 and 45, where this ridiculously skinny spindle of a post that's supposed to be holding up the porch overhead, I guess there, but it takes you around to the decorative lattice. The shadow of the decorative lattice carries you down. The shadow here brings you to the boy, and off again, we're to the races, but it circles the gentleman, the main character in the middle of the work. These types of techniques also will continue, particularly in her printmaking. And this one, of course, we're being carried up there, the lightning rod off to the prow of the ship and back down around to frame this really wonderful scene in the middle. And then two more of my favorite prints in the DMA collection. The boxcar at left, where she does almost two sets, nesting sets of set one within the other, the outer one here, and then the one further in framing up here to frame the little boxcar way in the back there. And of course, use of shadows and as part of a compositional element in the sun on the kitchen floor at right. She carries it forward into the 50s in this really wonderful still life from the Amon Carter Museum. And finally, my last example is this work, which is watercolor and cut paper in a private collection, where again she is emphasizing those same sort of directional thrust within the painting, within the work, down and brought across and back up to the scene up here. In closing, I have to say that the story of these women is a frustrating one, for the most part. With the exceptions of Velma Davis Stozier, who turned away from painting to metalwork, and Corinne Spellman, whose work has been preserved, the work of the other four, all who left a record of participation in exhibitions in Texas, New England, and other locales around the nation, are underserved due to the disappearance of key works produced during their long careers. In his essay titled Pioneers in Modernism in Making the Unknown Known, Jack Davis asked the question, why have these women not been recognized for the significant contributions they made to the advancement of art in Texas, especially the role in bringing modernism to Texas? The three overriding reasons he cited were they were women, they taught in a women's college, and lack of scholarship about them. I agree with all those points, but I would like to add another, with the exceptions of Velma Davis Dozier, whose family ensured her legacy, and Corinne Spellman, whose brother Mick similarly preserved and ensured that she and her work would not be lost to us. The others had no keepers of the flame. All the best known for her beautiful metalwork, where is Thetis Lemon's substantial oeuvre of paintings? The greater part of documented works by Edith Brezac, who retired in 1958 and moved to California, are nowhere to be found. And the story of Marie Delaney, whom I consider to have been the consistently strongest modernist among the group, is a disturbing one. A collector shared with me his efforts to track down Delaney's paintings by getting hold of the probate records for her estate. And yes, Texas collectors can be very rabid and very resourceful, but yes, that's the path he took. And he got to the probate records, which noted that she had left many works to a niece. He managed to get in touch with a niece, and she told him that she supposed that Marie had given them to her because she was one of the few who treated Delaney like a family member. She shared that Marie was a lesbian, and consequently, she was disowned and shunned by most of her family. Marie left works to her, but also to her partner, who left Denton and settled in California. What remains at Denton is thanks to Corinne Spellman, who carefully curated a selection from what Marie's brother, Burton, also an artist, left to the college following his death in 1973. What Spellman didn't select for the college collection was sold at auction in 1974. Going forward, it falls to us to become the keepers of the flame for these women and other women artists around the state who labored in obscurity while leaving their imprint on generations of their students. I hope that we won't let them down. Thank you. Time for any questions? All right, any questions, anybody? Hey, Michael.
Spellman's been a regular time in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Do you know if she had interactions with the Taos Moderns, like Andrew Dosberg or Ward Lockwood, just one of those Holy Mountains, you know?
I do not know. I do not know. I had, for reasons I had to limit this to a very narrow group of women and to that subject of Provincetown, but that's something worth looking into. I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised, you know, the sort of exchange of Ward Lockwood or Laura Mosley and all these guys coming from there to Dallas. I wouldn't really be surprised in the least, yeah.
You think they all flew into Provincetown, or did they drive?
Oh, I think there'd been a very long train ride, probably.
I mean, do you think any of them flew because of the aerial perspectives?
No, I think that's really probably more so from a promontory in Provincetown area, or going up to maybe like the top of this church steeple or whatever it was there in one of the main buildings there, to get those sort of bird's eye views looking down. Yeah, but I think it'd been trained by, train travel mostly in 1933. A very long train ride. Yes.
You mentioned that Delaney's partner had departed from Denton to California. Has there been any ability to track her or her descendants?
That individual tried and was unsuccessful. And in fact, recently I tried to get in contact with the niece. She would be 80 years old now, but all of the numbers, none of them got me to her, unfortunately, because I was really interested if she could elaborate more about that. She also shared that, she said, well, several of the other women, teachers there were lesbians as well, and so it makes one, I can't go around, tagging one, and it doesn't really matter, art is art, and great art is great art, no matter who it's by, but I don't know if that was the case for Brusac or not. I have no idea. Or for Theda Slimman, I have no idea. But, these women, they lived on, they retired, they probably outlived their parents or maybe their family. And if they were estranged from their families, who was the keeper of the flame? Who was going to look after the things? And as a matter of fact, the images that I showed of Charles Martin's work and the photographs of him, those were found set out for the trash to be taken away. And the guy who found them, pulled them all together. And when I was doing my O'Keeffe research, he got in touch with me. And so I'd say some of the evidence that we have left is because this guy saved it from the trash. And here, Charles Martin was well respected in his day, very much so even by Dow, while Dow was still alive, and taught generations of students. And, but, who was the keeper of the flame? So, anyway. One more. Hi, Sarah.
That was wonderful. Do you have plans to continue researching these women artists? And if so, are you wanting the public or other images of works?
I would love to see more images, and if there's any of you out there that has some of those black and white images lurking in your closet or hanging on your wall somewhere, because at this point, they're location unknown or they're lost to us, but they may be out there somewhere. And so if you have one of them, please feel free to step forward and let me know. But yes, I would love to continue with the research on it. I would love to have more images, though. I'd like to have the time to go do like a deep dive at Denton through what records are there and go from there. But it might be sort of fun because in the Ida O'Keefe show, when it was announced that we were going to do the show, and it was in the New York Times, it was like above the fold on the antiques page, and it said if anybody has any information, photographs or paintings, anything by, to do with Ida O'Keefe, get in touch with Sue Canterbury. And it was like crowdsourcing, and you wouldn't believe the stuff that came out of the woodworks, photographs, letters, all sorts of things that just, and the godsend was 10 days later, some guy called me, I bought this box years ago with her full scrapbook of her exhibition record and some of her artworks and all these sort of things, which allowed me to reconstruct her exhibition history. So that, crowdsourcing might be really the best way to go about something like this, because so much of these women have been so deep-sixed for so long. Yes, and yeah.
There's another text woman artist of this vintage who graduated from the City Teachers College in 1934. I'm a Pendergrass, and I'm wondering, one thing that I found in her history is contact with Ralph Pearson's art school in Nyack. Do the other CU graduates tend to engage with that Ralph Nyack's program? I mean, it's kind of art like.
I didn't see any mention of it, but it's possibly buried in some papers somewhere. I saw no mention of it. It was usually Provincetown a lot, and then of course sometimes Maine. Particularly for Spelman, but really New England, and I'd say part of the attraction of it as well was getting out of the hot Texas summers. So, but it was a real reprieve, so for many of them. So, Ready? Thank you.